Hi, Neil Griffith here. I'm here to comment about death threats on the internet and the idea of criminalizing death threats on gaming forums and on Facebook and places like Twitter and stuff like that. Right off the bat, I have to say I have no experience at all in receiving death threats on the internet. I've made all kinds of comments criticizing gun nuts, religious fanatics, conservative politics, no death threats. I twice participated in Draw a Cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad Day, no death threats. I've actively engaged in every single hot button topic, from abortion to creationism to Chick-fil-A, which you can find in all of my previous videos. No death threats. I'm nothing. Zero. Zip. Nada. I am the magical no death threat dude. The only experience I had with death threats are people threatening to kill me face to face. The worst I've ever had to experience was when I lived in a town called Abbotsford, British Columbia, from 1999 until 2008. From 1999 to around 2005, 2006, law enforcement would have to be described as non-existent. From 2001 to 2003, I worked as a security officer at Matsqui General Hospital. During those 2 years, I filled out more than 100 incident reports of the law being broken pretty seriously in a wide variety of crimes, none of which were ever followed up with any kind of criminal investigation of any kind. None. And I'm not talking about like trivial things like, you know, somebody got shoved. I'm talking about theft of up to $5,000, assault, people just pounding on each other, criminal trespass with the intent to steal, like stealing morphine and food and, patients' belongings and stuff like that. Nobody ever got arrested. I was not the only security officer there. I was only a casual. I had a dozen co-workers who all worked in security, and over the 2 years that I worked there, altogether, they would have filled out hundreds of incident reports of pretty serious crimes. Not a single one of them was ever followed up with a criminal investigation of any kind. No one got arrested ever. Now, if you add up all of the people that worked at Matsqui General Hospital, or at least there'd be a couple of hundred. 2 years I worked there, there would have been at least a few thousand incident reports that would have been filled out of many various crimes. Not a single one of them was ever followed up with a criminal investigation of any kind, ever. No one ever got arrested in that hospital the whole 2 years that I worked there. And if anyone did get arrested, somebody would have called me and told me, because the conversation would have been, they called me on the phone and said, Neil, you're not going to believe this, but hell is frozen over, and someone finally got arrested in this hospital. No one ever got arrested in that hospital. And it's pretty normal for a hospital to have a lot of crime in it. It's a place where the law gets broken quite often. There's drug addicts, belligerent drunks, wife beaters, homeless people, mentally ill people. When these people are getting stitches in their face, do you think they're on their best behavior? No, actually their behavior is actually remarkably terrible. Trust me, you would be surprised how violent an emergency ward can be. Even in the waiting room, people are picking fistfights all the time. The whole time I was there, the police did absolutely nothing about it. One time, I'll give you a whole bunch of examples. One time we had theft of morphine, of over $5,000 worth of morphine. It was inside a portable dispensing machine. Since it's portable, that means it can be carried around. Someone just picked it up and walked off with it. The machine was not what was worth $5,000. The morphine inside was worth $5,000. The machine was another few $1,000s on top of that. I filled out an incident report for that, but the police didn't even send someone over to ask me what did it look like. They didn't care. We had many brawls going on all the time on hospital grounds, usually in the smoke pit that was just outside the emergency ward waiting room. Homeless people or drug addicts would always be walking around looking for like cigarette butts or looking to beg money from people, and if two of them ran into each other where they're competing for a spot, obviously they're going to beat the hell out of each other. Also, there was families with domestic violence problems. The worst, they'd be beating each other up in the waiting room all the time. The worst I can remember, it happened right in the line of sight of a police officer. He was right there when the whole thing started. I saw him way in the background coming down the hallway. He was looking right at me, and that's when the whole fight broke out. Not only did he refuse to arrest anyone, despite the fact that I told these people to leave and they refused to, the cop contradicted me and said that these people had the right to be there. No, that's not actually true. You have the right to seek medical attention. But if you're just a visitor, you could be asked to leave at any time, especially if you're going to be picking fistfights in the waiting room. But this stupid cop actually listened to the father family saying, my boys didn't do anything wrong. He said, fine, you didn't do anything wrong. He said, they promise they'll be in their best behavior. And he just left. That cop was not 30 seconds out of the line of sight before the whole fight started up again. It was worse than ever. There was a patient who was hooked up to an IV unit who got knocked to the floor. The IV unit was knocked over. The IV unit bottle was smashed on the floor, and $5,000 of Invitrogen fluid was ruined because of this fight that the cop could have prevented if he just simply asked people to leave. You know, if he wasn't going to arrest them, he could have at least gotten them to go out the door. He didn't do a damn thing. Well, after that guy got knocked to the floor, I begged him, I pleaded with him, will you please press criminal charges against these people so we can at least get the police to ask them to leave. He said, no, forget it. Cops don't do shit in this town. And he was right. So there was nothing I can do. Problem was not just limited to the hospital, of course. The rest of the town was just as lawless. I was attacked many times, and I would call it a mugging. The police would dismiss as a aggressive panhandling. Of course, when they threaten to get violent with you, I call that mugging. People constantly lighting off thousands of illegal fireworks all over that town, all days of the year, always, constantly. Legal fireworks like Chinese firecrackers, bottle rockets, and those really big mortar rounds that make gigantic explosions. And of course, Abbotsford was right, it's a border town right next to America. That's where all this stuff came from. You can't buy this stuff in Canada. They also lit off pipe bombs all over the place. Now what they would do is they would grab a piece of PVC pipe about this big. They would scoop out the insides of fireworks and they would stuff it in a large chunk of PVC pipe until it was full. Then they would seal off both ends. They put a wick in it. They would light it, leave it on someone's doorstep, ring the doorbell, and run like hell. Because there's nothing as funny as having 5 pounds of explosive go up in some poor old lady's face. I went to the police station to complain about this, and I spoke to the chief, a completely fucking useless, goddamn little garden gnome in a police uniform, Mackenzie. He listened to me for a little while, and he said, well, boys'll be boys. He just gave me the smarmiest of looks. There's no word in English language that described the face that he gave me, but there's a German word for it. Backpfeifengeistig. Is it Backpfeifengeistig? I'm not pronouncing that properly, but go look it up. Backpfeifengeistig. That's a German word for a face begging to be punched. When I told Mackenzie about the pipe bomb, he told me that it was a matter for the fire marshal to deal with. Well, the firehouse was right next door to the police station. So I went there to speak to the fire marshal, and the fire marshal said to me, that's Mackenzie's polite way of telling you to fuck off. When somebody lights up pipe bombs in the middle of the street or on someone's doorstep, that's not for me to deal with. That's a criminal matter. You're supposed to arrest them, which they never did. By the way, the people who are lighting up pipe bombs all over this town actually blew up a mailbox once. They blew it to smithereens. That actually made the news, and it was dismissed by the police as a juvenile prank. Which is funny because the last time I lived in a city where people are blowing up mailboxes with homemade explosives, the Prime Minister of Canada declared martial law. But in Abbotsford, it's just a harmless prank. I wasn't the only person that Mackenzie told to fuck off. I remember my supervisor at the hospital, Greg Conlon, asked for everybody in security to submit all of the incident reports that they had of a single person who constantly trespassed on hospital grounds all the time. It was a guy named Andrew Yankovic. By the way, this is more than 10 years ago I filled out incident reports on this guy. Why do I remember his name? Because I wrote his name out over and over and over again to the point where it's just burned in my brain. I'm going to be remembering that guy's name until I'm 90. My most memorable encounter with Andrew Yankovic was he snuck into a storage unit on the second floor. He was hiding there because he was waiting for an opportunity when the nurses would go away. And then he would just steal everything that wasn't nailed down, including morphine and stuff like that. Now, he didn't want to give away his position. He had to go to the bathroom. So he opened the window and he peed out the window. And I'm on the ground floor right below him because it was my job to watch over the parking lot. And he urinated all over my uniform. It was normal to chase off Andrew off the premises at least a dozen times a day or more. Our supervisor grabbed all the incident reports on Andrew, which filled up at least a couple of boxes, enough to fill up probably an entire filing cabinet. He took them to the police station to show to the police chief, to appeal to him, will you please arrest Andrew Yankovic for something? He is completely monopolizing all of our time in the hospital. When Greg returned, he did not have a good look on his face. I asked him, so how'd it go? And he just went, don't even ask. And I know why he made that face, because Greg Conlon is the kind of person who's too polite to say in the workplace, they told me to go fuck myself. When we had drug addicts and drug dealers in our place that were constantly threatening us with violence all the time, so much so it's impossible to fill out an incident report for every single one of them, sometimes they would come in unconscious and we would find weapons on them. And here's an example of one that I found, this thing. I found this on a known drug dealer who had given us a hard time many times before. His name was Baby Blue Bill. He was called that because he always wore a baby blue covered hoodie, and that was his nickname. Now, what this is for is, I understand when they sell this in an outdoor place, there's a little belt loop thing here, and it's a knife that is held in place all by itself, so it doesn't fall out when you're doing work. But this is how drug dealers were using them. You see these two holes right here, this one and this one? They would put a very thick string through it, like this string right here. I've since thrown it away, by the way, the one that was up here. And they would hang it around their neck like this, and if things were going wrong, they would reach in their shirt and stick a knife in your eye. I took this from him because I don't need someone trying to stick a nurse on top of all the other shit I have to put up with all the time in that hospital. I kept this as a keepsake because if I was ever lucky enough to have a conversation with a police officer who would ever ask, what do you have to go through at a hospital? It's such a big deal anyway. Well, this for starters. Lots of times whenever drug dealers or drug addicts would come in unconscious to the emergency ward, whatever weapons they had on them went missing. We had an entire drawer full of them. I remember one of them was a long screwdriver that was sharpened at one end, had tape around it for the handle. And I thought, why would you do that? You're a drug dealer, you have money, just go out and buy a proper knife to stab me with. But apparently he just wanted that shanked so he could look gangster or ghetto or something like that. By 2006, some changes were made. McKinsey was kicked out as police chief. Nothing was going to improve while he was still around. And things started to change in the street as far as law enforcement was concerned. In the summer of August of 2006, I was shot on my way home from the gym by someone who was wielding a paintball gun. It was someone named Mr. Singh who was standing through the sunroof of a Honda Civic that was driving through the neighborhood, and he was shooting up the entire neighborhood with a paintball gun. The driver was holding his phone, his cell phone, out the window, and he was recording the whole thing so he could upload it to YouTube and humiliate me. Here's a photograph I took right after I was shot. I wiped the blood away off of my shoulder so you there could see how much skin was taken off of me. I found out later the reason why he hit me in the shoulder was because he was aiming for my head and he missed. I phoned the police and I was shocked that they actually showed up and arrested somebody for a change. I mean, wow, the planets magically aligned. But ultimately it made absolutely no difference whatsoever because the police may have changed, but the court system was still pretty screwed up. The judge let him off scot-free. I was sent a letter by the court that explained we acknowledged that the law was broken, but the judge didn't feel he wanted to ruin a young man's life over something so trivial as to shooting me with a paintball gun. There was an apology in the letter, and since the judge was such an excellent judge of character, he actually gave the gun back to Mr. Singh, to which Mr. Singh used to shoot up the neighborhood again several times over. One of the witnesses who called the police after I got shot, he came home from work one day to find his whole house was shot up with several hundred rounds of paintballs. Now, despite the fact that paintballs are water soluble, when you shoot up wooden panels with a couple of hundred of them, the whole house was ruined, and the only thing he could do was sand it down and repaint it, which cost thousands of dollars. No one was arrested because there were no witnesses. Later, I got a part-time job at a gas station, and Mr. Singh and his friends showed up. They saw me, they recognized me, and when I showed up for work the next day, my supervisor was washing several dozen paintball gun rounds off of the windows. And all of this was considered to be a remarkable coincidence, despite the fact that the caliber or size and color of the paintball rounds were the exact same caliber that was used by the gun that was given back to Mr. Singh after he was arrested for shooting me. After I got that letter with Mr. Singh's bullshit apology on it, I took it to the courthouse and I wanted to tell them to take this letter and shove it up your ass. Well, of course, they threatened to arrest me, and I remember there was one person who was there who shall remain nameless, but a lot of people know who he is, and he told me to get the hell over myself, and he said in these words exactly, "We don't send people to prison all because they happen to put a bullet in Neil Griffith." I got fed up with the lawless bullshit in that town of Abbotsford, and I moved. And since then, I've lived here in Kingston for about 6 years, and this is how the local law enforcement here has been. I remember a few years ago, there was a huge party, a couple of dozen people down the street. They were all underage drunken teenagers. And when the party had dispelled around 2 a.m., they were all milling about in all directions, all over the streets. And there was a fist fight going on between two of them right in my front yard. Now, I went outside to break it up, and one of them picked a fist fight with me. I went back inside my house, and I called the police on the phone. They'd say they'd be right over. They never showed up, never responded. By the way, the only thing that broke up that fight was the fact that the belligerent drunk saw somebody else down the street they wanted to get into a fight with, and they went chasing off after them, whoever that was. There was at least a couple of dozen people raising hell all over the place. They were like shoving fireworks through the mail slots of people's front doors and running away. I was up until 4 a.m. waiting for the police to show up and arrive. They never came. And I was not the only person who called the police. There were people all around me had called the police. And the whole night, I never saw one police cruiser show up anywhere. Mind you, that was one incident. In the past 6 years that I've lived in Kingston, one incident. In the same time frame in Abbotsford, I would have gone through hundreds of incidents. So it's still better here than it is there in Abbotsford. But as far as police presence is concerned, the police of Kingston have proven themselves to be about as useful as a bag full of broken tits. What is all of this building up to? Like, what am I leading to? All this bad news about real-life law enforcement? In my lifetime, I have been shot, stabbed, beaten, kicked, punched, clawed, slapped, spit on, pissed on, threatened on countless occasions. During all of that, not a single person has ever spent one night in jail because of it. Not one. And you want to send out the RCMP to go kick down doors and bust people because they were mean to you on Facebook or Twitter. Okay. There's something about death threats that you need to know, and it's all bad news. If someone came up to you in real life, in the real world, they came right up to you, and they made a death threat with witnesses all around, you know, like Jesus Christ is standing right there saying, "Whoa, death threat, I saw that happen." And if the person making the death threat gave it all the inflection that they would need to make it sound absolutely sincere, that they want to kill you, the police don't come charging. They don't send SWAT teams to drop out of the sky like a magical rescue unit all because someone has a big mouth. Look what happened to me, and no one's ever gone to jail. What do you think the odds are that they're going to send people out there because someone's being a big mouth on the internet? I would have to say the odds are pretty not good. Now, if I had a child whose life is being threatened all the time and it was actually making him suicidal, the last thing I would want to go running to solve that problem would be litigation and law enforcement. What I would do is I would get them the hell off of the internet. I mean, if it was actually hurting them mentally so much, I would cancel the ISP if I had to. As for myself receiving any death threats, if I ever actually said anything on a topic that I believed in that actually moved someone enough to threaten to kill me for it, I would wear that shit like a badge of honor. I would beg the administrators in whatever form it happened, please, please don't delete the comments. I want it there. Let the whole world see it. I don't care. I would collect it. If I had as many death threats as Thunderfoot or Pat Condell, I would collect the top 10 of those death threats and I would print them on a t-shirt so I could show it off to my friends. Like, oh look, ISIS 2191 wants to cut my head off. I would collect death threats like people collect pogs. Like, oh, let's see, this one's from a gun nut, and This one is a jihad. Oh! This one is a fatwa from the Ayatollah.